The House of Representatives this month has voted to remove 3 authorizations for the use of military force that are granted to the president. Earlier in the month, they voted to take away the 2002 Iraq War military use of force authorization, and today they voted to remove one from 1957 that gave him Cold War powers in the Middle East to fight communism, and they voted to remove 1991 Gulf War powers. So why are they doing this? Who's supporting it? Well, they're doing it because there's been a broad identification of a risk for the executive branch misusing these powers to justify a war that the legislatures does not want them to engage in. Who's supporting this? It's bipartisanly supported. It's very interesting that this is bipartisanly supported because in the past, Republicans probably would have cast this in the light of something that is detrimental to national security, that increases the risk of terrorism because it decreases the ability of the executive branch to wage war on terror, basically. So I think it's a very good thing that people from both parties are calling into question this executive power. This is really the first example of the legislature reeling back in the power that they have delegated to the executive. If you don't know, ever since the New Deal, the legislature has, through the use of alphabet soup agencies, the EPA, the DOD, etc., basically given the power to make laws to executive branch agencies, which has increased the power of the executive branch agencies exponentially. And how they do this is basically they'll say, let's use the EPA as an example. Well, we can all agree that it is good for there to be clean water in America. However, maybe the legislators don't know enough to make the very specific laws that you need to have clean water in America. And maybe they know that they wouldn't be able to come to enough of a consensus to create those laws because they're all facing voters at home. So what they do is they write this bill that says, we want to have clean water in America, and we're going to make this agency, the EPA, to ensure that we have clean water in America. So they delegate their power to make laws. It's called the rulemaking process. And basically, the EPA goes through this process where the American people don't have anybody that they voted for that writes the rules. However, they hold the same power of law that laws written by your House of Representative member or your senator have. So this delegation of power is bad for democracy just because you don't vote for the people who make these rules, so you can't vote them out if you don't like the rules that they're making. However, the legislators do have the power to take back the power. That being said, they rarely do this. And why is that? Well, it's very convenient to have somebody else make the rules. I mean, you know this. If you're living with your parents and they make a stupid rule, you can say, Mom, why are you doing that? And it's outside of my power to control this. You can blame it on somebody else. Same thing if you're facing your voters at home. You can say, man, the EPA is doing this terrible thing. And most of your voters won't even know because people don't really understand how our government functions, that you're the one who's responsible for the EPA existing, since as a legislator, you were the one who either passed the bill to put the EPA into existence or who has not gotten a bill through to rein in the powers of the EPA. Since their powers at the highest level, all these federal agencies, are dictated by federal statute, which they then derive their power from to issue rules and regulations and, of course, enforce those rules and regulations with the full power of the United States federal government. So in this one instance, the legislators are saying, hey, we don't think it's a really good thing that the Department of Defense and the president get to say, well, we think that we should be going to war in X Middle Eastern country, and we have 4 different use of force authorizations that allow us to do so. So legislators, you don't like it. What are you going to do about it? They actually want the president to have to come to them in order to go to war. They're reeling in the president's powers. And this is also seen in a very influential military use of force authorization, the one that they signed in 2001 following 9/11, which is the one that's been used to justify the war in Afghanistan. They're working with the executive branch to modify the terms of that use of force authorization. They're not going to completely remove it from the books, but they're at least going to attempt to put some limits on it. So this is a win in multiple ways. One, it's a win because it's taking away power immediately. Obviously, it has to make its way through the Senate, and that's going to take time, but it looks like the support is there. So it will immediately close those doors. But it's also a win because, on principle, it's a good thing for the legislature to take back power that it has abdicated to the executive branch. And by the way, if you're wondering why our politics are so screwed up and so polarized right now, it's largely because of this abdication of power. Basically, there are thousands of people who are not directly accountable to the American voters who make all of the rules that American people have to live by. If you were to print out all of the laws passed by Congress in a year, and then all of the regulations promulgated by federal regulatory agencies and put them in stacks next to each other, it would not at all be comparable. The House and the Senate are designed to have gridlock, and that's designed to be the way that the American government functions. There's supposed to be action at the federal level on things that absolutely need to have action and that we can all agree on, the things that people in the liberal North and in the conservative South can agree are functions of the federal government. Those are supposed to be done by the federal government. But there's supposed to be so much gridlock that it's near impossible for the federal government to have a huge role. So then states would have to step up and do more. Instead, when you pass the buck to all of these unelected, unaccountable administrators, you then have them to blame and they all report to the president. So suddenly it becomes a huge deal who the president is. Which is why when Donald Trump wins, if you're a liberal, he can do all these things that you really hate. He shouldn't have the power to do all these things that you really hate. There should be your governor that has the power to do these things and your state legislature that has the power to do these things. So seeing at least a small backstep on the principle of just taking the legislature's power and vomiting them onto the executive branch is something that we should all be happy about, regardless of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, as is evidenced by the bipartisan support for this bill.